And joining us now on The Debate, one of the most preeminent music journalists in Canada, Larry LeBlanc, actor, musician, and TVO Kids host, Jackie English, who plays drums in a Beatles cover band. Greg Diamond, arts and entertainment writer for CBCNews.ca. Catherine Burrell, author of the new memoir, Corked. And Jerry Levitan, producer of the Academy Award-nominated and Emmy Award-winning animated film, I Met the Walrus. It's great of all of you to be here tonight for a discussion about why the Beatles' legacy endures. This is, of course, a huge day in Beatle land. They have released 14 albums today, digitally remastered. It's the musical event of certainly the year, arguably maybe the decade. There's a new video game out today, Beatles Rock Band. Before we try to discuss the Beatles' legacy and why it endures, we got to start with one thing. Larry, who broke up the Beatles anyway? No, I'm kidding. Never mind. We're not going to do that. Let's start with your personal connection to the Beatles. You've been a music journalist for many years. You were backstage with them earlier in your career. What was that like?
I wasn't backstage actually with the Beatles. I was backstage with John Lennon when he came here into Toronto 40 years ago this weekend, by the way, to play the Rock and Roll Revival. And he came off the plane, you know, and that's when they did the Plastic Ono Band. And he literally walked in, said hi to Gene Vincent, and then ran for the toilet and threw up. And I'm a young journalist. I had just started writing a couple years before. I started writing in 1965. And back in those days, the record companies would give you advances of albums before they were released, you know, to retail stores. So, you know, to walk around in high school, it's the new Beatle album. It's coming out Tuesday. That's why you become a journalist. So I was covering them from an early period of time. And then, of course, John Lennon spent a lot of time here for a bunch of different projects. You know, the War's Over project, obviously.
Well, here and
in Plastic,
Montreal.
And Montreal. And as I said, the show at Varsity Stadium 40 years ago, you know, it became part of a recording and is also out again as a DVD. It just came out again.
Let me go to the guy beside you. Congratulations, first of all, on your success for I Met the Walrus. That is terrific. The nominations and the award for the Emmy as well.
Thank you.
1969. You're a teenager. You happen upon John Lennon. Tell that story and what that meant to you.
Well, I'll give you the short version. It was May '69. The Beatles are in the middle of recording Abbey Road, their swan song. There was a rumor that John and Yoko were spotted at the Toronto airport. So that's all I, as a 14-year-old Beatle freak, needed to hear. So I went to the King Edward Hotel where I thought they'd be, and went to the top floor on a Monday morning at about 7 in the morning, knocked on every door until, to make a long story short, I found him.
John Lennon answered the door.
Well, he didn't answer the door. Actually, you see, I'll give you the longer version now. I went down a corridor and I saw Kyoko, Yoko's daughter from her previous marriage, on the floor coloring with crayons. So I knew I struck gold. And then I think it was a CBC cameraman came, knocked on the door, it opened up a bit. He said CBC, it opened up a bit more. I went in, the door closed with a vacuum, like, and then I waited 10, 15 minutes. I knocked on the door, it opened up like that. I said, Canadian News. I barged right in, just stared at my feet and shuffled because I didn't want eye contact, saw a tripod, sat down and looked up, and within 4 or 5 feet of me sat John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
Why were they so important to you, a 14-year-old young man in Toronto at the time?
I, like millions of kids around the world, loved the Beatles. Not only did I love the Beatles, they captivated everything that was growing and evolving in my young life. The way to look, the way to dress, the way to talk, the swagger, or I think they call it swagger now, but how to look upon the older generation.
You haven't mentioned music yet.
Well,
that too.
Well, yeah. Well, the music. Okay. Well, you see, for me, those were the Beatles were so much more than just music. Now, without question, the music it was the center of everything for me. The ideas behind the songs, the sound of it, and talk about mono versus stereo. I had this really cheap stereo. I didn't have headphones, so I put the speakers against my head, against each ear, and I would re-listen to the records over and over again, and I could tell where the bass was here, or where one voice was there, or if it shifted this way or that way.
I bet this woman over here can tell that because she is in a Beatles tribute band called the Mockers. Can I ask what year you were born?
No, not on TV.
Okay, I'm going to ask, because that's my job to ask the smart-ass questions.
I obviously. It's funny though that you asked that, because my very first time hearing the Beatles, or so I'm told because I don't remember, was actually the tapes of what my mom listened to in the hospital when I was born. So that was my very first musical.
Obviously, you know where I'm going here. I mean, this group broke up well after, well before you were born.
Oh, absolutely.
So they could not have been a kind of a part of your childhood in the way they were for the guys on this side.
No, but they were. That's
table.
what I'm saying. Like, I remember distinctly every Sunday there was a radio station that would play a Beatles brunch of music. So every Sunday when I was small, music would play and I would listen to it. And in fact, as a Beatles tribute band, we've actually done a lot of business in events like bar mitzvahs. We even did a 7-year-old's birthday party, who certainly is, born in 2000 and something, and the little kids seem to love it as much as the older people. I mean, and at the bar mitzvahs, people walk around with Beatles on their T-shirts, and they know all the lyrics to all the songs.
These are 13-year-olds who obviously didn't live it at the time. Greg, when did you become a fan?
Well, I was alive in the 60s, but I really kind of missed the whole Beatles story. I guess my pop culture idols at the time were the Friendly Giant and Mr. Dress Up. It wasn't until 1973, a friend of mine, Bill Carr, at high school, grade 9, I guess, introduced me to the greatest hits albums, the 62-66 Red album and the 67-70 Blue album. And I was instantly mesmerized. I was just struck by wonder and curiosity and awe, and did the same group that recorded Love Me Do record Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds? And it's just kind of ever since then been a lifelong quest for knowledge about the Beatles. I buy bootlegs, I read virtually every Beatles book. I will confess on television that I go to Beatle fan conventions.
Who's your favorite?
Favorite Beatle?
Yeah.
Paul. Paul, for sure. But I love them all.
I'm shocked to hear that.
Well, it's Paul. But I haven't met John Lennon, but I met Mike McCartney at a Beatles fan convention. So that's my claim to fame.
Okay, can I ask the director, Michael Smith, to take a bit of a wider shot of our next guest, Catherine? Catherine, this is the definition of chutzpah, coming onto a show about the Beatles, and look what you're wearing. You're wearing
know,
a
I'm a
rolling.
contrarian.
It's a Rolling Stone
I'm here
shirt.
to rain on the parade.
What are you trying to say here, Catherine?
I'll let the lips do the talking for me. No, you know what? I don't. It's not that I don't have an affinity for the Beatles. I do. My mother is British, and I grew up with the Beatles in the house. She had this accident in the mid '80s where she was training for the Philadelphia Marathon. She fell into a manhole during the training, and she hurt her knee, and she was laid up in bed for a few weeks. And the thing that got her up out of bed and dancing was actually A Hard Day's Night. So I have positive memories of the Beatles. I just, when it comes to the demarcation between Beatles and Stones, I fall on the Stones side.
Why?
There's a more gritty feel to the music. I think
Beatles are too much Pretty Boys?
Yeah, Pretty Boys, they're a bit too poppy for me, and in terms of sort of their lyrical contents, and they've got obviously a vast body of work, but I'm speaking more generally here. There's a poppier and more sort of, dare I say, facile quality to their songwriting.
Fighting words from the other side of the table. Well, one of the things that I think the age range here does show, and we're going to bring up some graphics here to indicate this, the Pew Research Center in the United States did a larger survey of the broad tastes of Americans, and it showed that the Beatles, probably unlike any other group going today, have popularity across 4 generations. Let's bring these charts up, Michael. We'll show everybody what we mean. Here's the popularity of performer by age. Saying they like it a lot, ages 16 to 29, there's Michael Jackson, presumably, this was done in August when he died, so that's perhaps not a shock to see him number 1. There's the Beatles, number 2. Go to ages 30 to 49, and there are the Beatles at 42%. They're right in the middle of that group. Michael Jackson there too. Ages 50 to 64, the Beatles, number 1. Number 1 by a long way. And how about even if you're over 65, well, Sinatra, of course, the chairman of the board ought to be there, but the Beatles are there as well. It doesn't seem to matter how old you are, what generation you're from, the Beatles have appeal. Why?
There's an interesting thing, slant for Canada, by the way. The Beatles actually broke in Canada 11 months before they broke in the United States. United States, Capitol Records US had turned them down, and they went through a number of different labels. They were on Tolly, they were on VJ. Capitol Records of Canada had an Englishman who was running the national promotion and A&R, a man called Paul White, and he instantly got the Beatles. So, the early stuff like Love Me Do, like She Loves You, were all huge hits in Canada first. In fact, there's a book on the Beatles in Canada, and at one point they were actually exporting copies of Canadian copies of From Me to You into the States. So our affinity goes back a lot more.
Okay, but why over so many generations?
Well, I think one of the things, that is, well, first off, there aren't that many mega groups like the Beatles. I was trying to think of another group that has had the impact on culture, on music, on everything from classical music to jazz to every style of music you can think of. I mean,
Even Sinatra covered some of their tunes.
Well, Sinatra loved Something. It was one of his favorite tunes. In fact, George Harrison was in the studio when he recorded that song in Los Angeles. I'm surprised there's not a Beatle opera. There probably is somewhere around. They touched every basis of it. And it's interesting, the Rolling Stones analogy, because one of the things that was in the 60s was you were either a Beatles fan or you're a Rolling Stones fan. You weren't both. It was one or the other. And quite frankly, the Stones were the group that your parents hated, where your mom would go, I think the Beatles, that Paul's kind of cute.
Paul's kind of cute. That takes me right over to Greg. Why do you think this cross-generational effect?
I think one of the things that's so remarkable about the band is the sonic and the musical diversity, and kind of picking up on what Larry said is they explored so many genres of music. When you look at the White Album, there's English music hall, Helter Skelter's almost a proto-punk song. There's ballads, there's folk, there's country, kind of bluegrass. And another kind of genre they explored was children's songs. And so those kids' songs, I think, are real entry points for kids. And so I think rather than being stylistically or lyrically facile, they were actually rather complex.
Jackie?
Well, as someone who's witnessed the effect of this music on everybody from 7 to 97, I think that the sort of fundamental thing that makes everyone like it is because it kind of makes you dance. You can dance to it. It's very personal, especially in early Beatles, all the lyrics and everything was all saying you, and the energy was coming right off the Beatles and focusing in on the audience. So it was a very personal connection. It wasn't them singing about other things. I mean, they were, but they were so directional with their energy and their intent to bring joy and experience to their people, that they get them dancing, get them singing along and feeling like they were singing about them, that you don't need to know the history or whatever. You can just be a very small person, you hear that energy and you start bopping and
Can't
then you
sit
love
still,
it.
right, Jack? Can't sit still.
Me?
Well, that's what you're saying. Jerry, over here.
Yeah, I was going to say that, and I'm going to say that the lyrics, the music, the sound definitely give the Beatles a distinction from other pop music. But for me, it was always the ideas behind the songs. Now, not every song had great ideas, but I think that's what gives it its endurance. There are stories, and not just silly Paul McCartney stories like Maxwell's Silver Hammer, but whether it's John Lennon's I'm So Tired, the story of him trying to quit smoking, the Ballad of John and Yoko, his story of what John and Yoko were going through at the time. Even Yesterday, even though the original is Beatle Freaks Know, the original title was Scrambled Eggs. Yesterday tells a story as opposed to just throwing words in like the Stones would do with a grungy guitar.
Okay, we're not going to get off on
But I
that
think
tangent.
it's more than just a story, though. They had this sort of a very positive message of love that they were very sincere about, and I think you feel it when you listen to them.
It was upbeat.
But more than tempos, I'm
Not
talking
all the
about
time.
intention.
Larry, then
No, it wasn't always love. Come on, we had songs like I'm Down, Help. The interesting thing about the Beatles albums, when you take them one by one, is they started off doing other people's music for the most part, a lot of Motown stuff. Only band I know that covered everything from Carl Perkins on one side to Buck Owens. And I think what hit me in going back through their albums this week was, I can remember when the albums came out and every one of them was a revelation. We watched their evolution album by album by album to the point that somebody like Brian Wilson would lock himself into the room, into a room after hearing Rubber Soul and go, oh my God, we've got to come up with something better than this. And quite frankly, when those albums came out, everybody sat down and you saw an evolution. And you just hit it right on the head. Here's the band that did Love Me Do and did Sgt. Pepper and Blue Jay Way. And the other side, you're right about the music that you can dance to, But you know something, what really hit me again going back through some of these albums is the fact that they're a rock and roll band, but they're also those soft numbers of McCartney where you would just sit there and go, whoa, boy, that's a beautiful melody.
Catherine, go ahead.
Well, just quickly, and I don't deny anything anyone has said so far. There's a universal appeal and a broad swath that they covered, and I apologize for saying that their lyrics were fast. Duly noted. Need to do more research. But I think also there was a little bit of luck involved too. I think the timing of the Beatles was incredible. I think they came at a time where the music industry wasn't so fractious as it currently is. Right? You know, they filled a need that people want, you know, that people wanted what the Beatles had to offer, and also I think that they're a huge marketing machine now, right? You know, you look at what's happening with this box set that's just come out. It's selling for $300. You've got Rock Band now on the wagon. So in the last maybe 10 years, where you've got the internet, you've got an element of sort of easy dissemination for the Beatles machine, and you've got tons of money behind it as well. It's like the snowball at the top of the mountain with the avalanche, and it just rolls, and Larry's like, no, you're wrong.
I want to ask Jerry about this, though. I want to ask Jerry
But they followed the death of John Kennedy. Don't forget that.
Yes.
Where you had a whole world within mourning, and I think more importantly,
Don't you think that fills a need though?
Well, no, but not a musical need. People needed a release, and the Beatles gave it to them.
Right.
What can I ask Jerry about the yes I to quote you, yes I can, and I will. The baby boomers who set so much of the cultural yardsticks for this society. This is a perfect boomer's success story. Do you think the fact that I guess Paul's 67 or 68, is that a little beyond the boom? Maybe it is, but is it because they're an echo of everything the baby boomers love? That's why they're still with us today?
Well, it doesn't explain the other 3 generations, that you listed. If that were true, it would just be our demographic. But something else is fueling this, the power of the music. And if I could just talk about my own situation, because of the film, with the Academy Awards, and then the book, and now the Emmy thing, I get emails from people around the world, from kids around the world. I got a call when my book came out from a kid in Schenectady who called, and I thought, because with this kind of stuff you generally get some wackos out there, so I thought it was someone a little off. And it was a kid about 15 years old, 14, 15 years old. And he said, "Hi, is this Jerry Levitan?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I just want you to know that I read your book, and I think it's really great. I think the Beatles are really cool. I wish there was something like that for my generation." And I was waiting for the next thing. Can I have some money, or here's a gun, or something? And I said, "Well, thanks for calling." He says, "Okay, bye." I've gotten emails from South America, from India. And from all kinds of generations and different cultures, and something beyond just the music is behind that.
Let me talk about Rock Band for a second here, and I'm going to go to the rock and roll star over here to do that, because of course part of today's announcement is not just the digitally remastered box sets that are out, the CDs, but this new video game that presumably much younger people than all of us around this table are going to play. Or maybe not, maybe some older people as well. Anyway, let's roll this, Michael, if we can. Here's the Beatles Rock Band video.
Here we go.
Well, that's your group. Those
Yes.
are the Mockers playing the game.
Yeah, the Mockers rock band.
How'd you find it?
It's actually kind of fun.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's totally fun. And I have to say, little plug for the group. The first time we did it, the guys got 99% on the harmonies.
I would hope so. You guys are pros.
Yeah.
You're not
No,
the
but
Beatles, but you're pros.
It's true, and I just want to add to the discussion that was happening a second ago too. Is I think that the harmonies and the quality of the music is sort of the main thing, which is, and maybe what's your question about the rock band?
Well, let's that was you guys playing it, but
Yeah.
let's take a little look at the video as well. Then we'll come back and talk some more. Go ahead, Michael. Roll that. fantastic graphics.
Totally. One of them
Yeah.
looks kind of like you.
Which one?
The paw, I think.
The Paul looks like me?
Yeah.
Wrong show. The cute one. Thank you. You can come back despite the shirt. Well, there's Guitar Hero, of course, which most young people, or I guess a lot of young people play. Is this better or worse than that, or can you make a judgment about
Well,
that?
I like it better because it has the drums, right? You can drum along to it. So, and the drumming and the vocals are probably the things that are sort of closest to the actual, you know, I mean, you're hitting a drum-like pad with a stick. It's closest to drumming, and singing is close to singing, obviously. With Guitar Hero, is nothing really like a guitar. There's no strings.
No strings, colors.
No.
This is aimed, I think, obviously, at people more your age than my age.
Sure.
But why would younger people buy this as opposed to a video game with the, I don't know who, Nirvana or Green Day or, you know, Black
I'm
Eyed
actually
Peas?
not
or,
sure.
You answered your own question, Steve. They're
What?
not aiming at that. They're aiming at.
They're really aiming at older guys like me?
I think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
The kids
I do
the
think
kids
more
aren't
adult.
going to buy this. The kids are going to be there for Guitar Hero.
Or the parents
5.
of the kids are going to buy it in order to introduce their children to rock bands, and I think there's that nostalgia factor that we were
And
talking
maybe
about.
this is a good incentive to get a kid who wants Rock Band. This is the excuse for the parent to get it. Because one way that a lot of kids are exposed to Beatles is simply because the parents are such big fans.
And the gaming industry, by the way, is overjoyed by this competition. They're going to heat it up because the gaming industry right now, this year, is down 46%. So the fact that they can have 2 titles going neck and neck in the marketplace, they're real happy about this.
Greg, tell me why this music is all out there, right? There's no new music that's actually being introduced today. We've heard all these songs before. Yes, they're digitally remastered, but for most Beatle fans who've already got all this music, why would you buy all this again?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the completists have to have everything, and this also kind of serves, I think, Larry maybe can agree or disagree, as the last major CD event. There's really nothing left to be released on CD anymore. No? Okay.
Where do you see what the Hendrix estate's got for you? Okay. I think what's different here is there's 2 sets here. Okay, there's the stereo box set that's got everything, and there's a mono box set which is missing 3 albums. Okay, the Yellow Submarine and the last 2 albums the Beatles did, Let It Be and Abbey Road. Okay. The mono is mind-blowing. It is
You've listened to it?
Yes, I've listened to it. I've heard both that and the stereo. I didn't get all the way through the stereo because I had to pick and choose. There were just so many of them. The monos I've listened to, it's the way they recorded in those days was they recorded most things in mono, and they came back about a month later, and then they did a stereo edit. And you got to remember, they were recording in those days in 2 and 3 track first, and then 4 track. And essentially, there wasn't much to the stereo mix. It was like that, and I think they kind of went, and then they remastered everything in, I think, '87 when they went the
Yes.
CD. The monos have different versions in some cases, different vocals. I started listening, and there were some things on the White Album. I'd be 10 seconds into the song, and I'm going, "Oh my God, I would recognize it." They're that different. It isn't a completist album. It's an album, if you love the Beatles, that's the album to get. The stereo album is the same stereo that you've heard for quite a while, just cleaned up. Everything's been, they've taken all that compression off, thank God. They've had all the Beatles.
What does that mean, they've taken the compression off?
Compression is a way of muting things down and different things like that. It's an overall mute on the record. It's like putting almost, I thought, a glove on the records. I've been very contemptuous of all the Beatle reissues over the years because I've got those Japanese half-speed masters, the vinyls that came out in the 60s, and they're mind-blowing. I'm telling you, this is good, and these EMI have finally done it right. Now, whether or not it's too late because CD sales have slipped down, it's not the same. They should have had this out in the marketplace 5 years ago.
I just wonder, I guess
Why?
And it's great. No, well, it's great to hear all of this, and I mean, I'm an audiophile as well. I work in radio, so I'm an audiophile. I love hearing great quality sound, but at the same time, our lives are limited over the space-time continuum, and one would wonder why there's so much new music out there, and there's so much. It's so easy to discover so much new great music. So why do we not spend a little bit more time being slightly more adventurous about our musical tastes, as opposed to sort of kind of wallowing in this pit of nostalgia? Can you though?
Yeah.
Do that?
nostalgia. It's not nostalgia if you're, because the people discovering, and every time an album comes out from the Beatles or whatever, there's people discovering it for the first time, and every generation that comes discovers it for the first time. So there's no nostalgia.
But I'm not talking
I
about
hold
them,
no
I'm talking
nostalgic
about-
value with the Beatles. I just like to play it, and I like the reaction that I get when I'm playing. We played for the British consulate, the consulate general of Canada when he was retiring. He's seen the real Beatles, and like to him it was nostalgic, right? But then we go and we play, you know, a New Year's party or something where there's young people, and it's not nostalgic. It's just fun, and it's good music, and the quality is so high, and I think it is interesting that it has lasted for so long. But that's the test for any great album. I mean, we still listen to Beethoven. Nobody says, well, shouldn't he be done by now?
I don't
He's
think
dead.
you can really accuse the Beatles. I mean, I grew up. My teenage years correspond exactly with the '70s. So really the Beatles is the only area of '60s pop culture that I embrace. I grew up into punk and a movement that's completely opposed to the 1960s. But yeah, I don't think they flood the marketplace, unlike many other groups. This, as Larry says, this took years to appear. They really don't make that many deals with people. The Cirque du Soleil people is one. You don't hear their songs flooding into movies all of the time.
No, but there's just so much. There's in terms of books that come out and biographies and sort of the revisit.
It's an industry.
It's an industry, and I feel like what's just come out now has been benefited greatly by the stuff that's not directly related to the Beatles, instead to EMI, to Apple Corps, but thankfully it's been riding this wave of momentum over the last 40 years.
Right. Can I defend myself as an old codger? I haven't listened to a Beatle album probably in about 20 years, from maybe Sgt. Pepper at some point. And I was not a Beatle fan. I was a Rolling Stone fan of the people that were split. 2-3 days ago, I was not a Beatle fan. After Yesterday, I'm a Beatle fan again.
The song or Yesterday?
No. Well, it was like a renewed going. Oh, and if you really think about it, how many people have actually heard a Beatle album from top to bottom in 20 years? We've heard the anthology albums. We've heard clips here. We have number ones, or we put it on the iPod, or the silly projects that EMI would put out every year. The Beatles, dropped out, or the Grey album, or this, or all the different type of things like that. How many people have actually sat down and played a Beatle? And don't forget, these are the.
What's your point? Okay,
these are the British pressings. First off, of the Beatle albums, and it's like re-experience something that you experienced once a number of years ago.
Tell me this: why can't you get Beatles tunes on iTunes?
The estate can't agree. All the different parties. It looked like it was going to happen today. There was speculation. Yoko had. Apparently, I don't know if it was a real, if it really happened in Britain. She had said it was going to come out to Sky News, and now that's said to be a hoax. There is a problem. I think they're missing the boat, and I think they're going to wake up much like we were waiting for the Dave Clark 5 albums years ago to come out, and then you got to a point nobody cares. And another 5 years from now, about the Beatles, no, it won't be the same. This is the last hurrah.
Well, I was going to ask that. Jerry, do you think there's anything left in this well? It does seem as if the Beatles re-release something every couple of years. Anything left in that well to release?
Well, I think there's at least one other song that they were going to release when they did Anthology. I forget what it's called. Now and Then. It's another John Lennon scratchy sort of demo. So there's talk of doing that, but
bootlegs.
There's another crack at Anthology.
Yeah.
There's got to be tons of tapes and different versions.
Will you buy this box set?
You know what? I'm sort of overloaded, and I'm sort of overloaded because of my own personal experience. I'm sure I'll get back to it, but I'm not going to do it right one. I'm going to sit for a while.
Can't wait too long. They're all gone from.
Well, watch out, because the mono set is a limited edition. With the stereo albums, they will be available, and which is nice with the stereos. They're available by individual album, and I think this is going to be. Remember in the old days that you'd have the Beatle Christmas, a big album going into it. You're going to have a Beatle Christmas because there's nothing. I don't know what's the next major.
I'm not going to have a Beatle Christmas, Larry.
I'm going to have a set send over.
I'm going to do heroin and have a heroin Christmas this year.
I'm going to get EMI to make sure they send you a box.
There you go. We got about 5 minutes left here, and I want to read something that Michael Gilmore wrote in Rolling Stone magazine this month, and then talk about whether or not it rings true with you guys. Here he goes. The story of the Beatles was always in some way bigger than the Beatles, both the band and its individuals. It was the story of a time, of a generation reaching for new possibilities. It was the story of what happens when you reach those possibilities and what happens when your best hopes come apart. It was all such a long time ago, George Harrison said years later. Sometimes I ask myself if I was really there or whether it was all a dream. They were all there, and it was all a dream. It lifted us, it broke our hearts, it goes on, and perhaps nothing quite like it will ever change the times again. Okay, that's a big exhale.
It's a big exhale because it's a lovely lyrical reductionist view of the time.
Is it false?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's false. I mean, I wasn't even around. I'm 30 years old. I wasn't even around then. But there was tragedy there too. There was Bob Epstein dying of a methamphetamine overdose. There were things that happened within that just the story is more complex and nuanced. And I think that's my problem with the Beatles is that it provides this access point to this piece of nostalgia, this better time, this idealized better time, and which is fine. There's a place for nostalgia. But I do feel like it is a bit of a wasteful emotion.
Brian Epstein, right?
Brian. What did I say?
Bob, I think.
Oh my gosh.
Jerry, then Greg.
I was just going to say one thing we haven't touched on, which I think is the DNA of the Beatles, and that is the accident of nature of Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Those two forces colliding and creating,
magic.
Matter and antimatter. You can call it magic too. I don't think you can deny it. And when you look at the Paul McCartney solo material and the John Lennon material, solo material, they never reach the heights that they reached when they collided.
I thought what you read was piffle.
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 You don't like it?
No, this was a rock band, a fabulous rock band, who got together for all different reasons, came out of Hamburg and Liverpool, created a sound around the world and broke up like most rock bands did, fighting and arguing among themselves.
Larry, I read a piece the other day which came out of the former Soviet Union, which said that the Beatles were as responsible as anything. Now, I hadn't heard this before, but people like Vladimir Posner were quoted as having said the Beatles were as responsible for the end of the Soviet dictatorship and the end of communism as anything.
You mean it wasn't Reagan?
Well, I guess it was Reagan, and it was Gorbachev, and it was the Beatles, according to this.
No, and don't forget, they weren't an influence at that point. No, there was a whole other argument. I've heard that about MTV as well, too. No, and
they were anti-establishment. They got people thinking against the state. They got people thinking other things were
not
possible.
by the time the wall came down. Come on.
Greg?
I think at the very least, they reinvented the idea of what rock and roll stars could be. And Catherine talked earlier about the precipitous timing. And pop stars around the time of the Beatles were Fabian, Frankie Avalon, not very well spoken, not funny. And they landed at JFK Airport, and they were witty, irreverent. They treated the whole drama unfolding around them as absurdist comedy, and I think that was a great response.
Jackie, I want to ask you this. Every time my kids play me something of their music, the first thing, I hate to say it, that always pops into my head is, am I going to be listening to this music when I'm 64? Is this going to have the kind of legs that the stuff that we've all grown up listening to will? Are you going to be listening to the Beatles in 40 years?
Will they be?
Will we be? They're going to be as big in 40 years as they are today?
Probably, yeah. I mean, they've lasted this long. Like, I think they were like the original sort of pop rock band. Like, they were the first ones that got to the level of fame that they did. And now there's lots of people sort of doing it, but it's like a machine now. The labels are all involved now. Like, they're sort of like, the original. I think anytime you're the original, you're remembered. And just given the fact that I've seen the kids who are just starting, as well as the adults and everything, that I don't see why they wouldn't be around. I think they've passed the test of time. And the stuff that your kids listening to, I don't know if we'll actually be able to know until it passes the test of time.
Are we going to be listening to Kanye and Akon in 50 years?
No, but we'll be listening to, we'll probably be listening to Radiohead in 30 years, I'd hope. I think they represent something.
Says, I mean, who outsold the Beatles, and people don't talk about that, is Bing Crosby. Outsold them 3-1. You don't talk about that.
That's shocking.
And that's no.
But Bing Crosby doesn't have cross-generational appeal.
Well, yeah, he sure did for about 4 decades.
My kids are not listening to Bing Crosby.
No, they're not. And they won't listen to the Beatles in 4 decades.
He was very mean, too.
You don't think no?
No. But life moves on.
Tell you what, thanks to the movie Across the Universe, there are a lot of young kids today that know the lyrics to all the Beatles songs.
Yeah.
Classics are
really
man-made.
something.
Classics are man-made, and our attention might.
They're really
I
good
absolutely
songs. At
think
the end of the
they'll be
day, they're
listened
just
to.
really good
Absolutely.
songs.
Great.
They're the classics of our time. I fully believe they'll be
I don't
listened
mean in
to.
the same way. We still listen and we still watch Bing Crosby do White Christmas and different things a period of time. Things change. And they'll be remembered on certain things. And by the way, Fabian and the rest of them and Frankie Avalon were long gone by the time the Beatles arrived. That was 58. By the time the Beatles arrived in the States, it was 64. It was like the Four Seasons. The Beach Boys were starting to hit, and they took it back. I mean, the music, the songs may live different type of way.
Well, you have to
We
admit
might not,
the Beatles
though,
were
because we're
wittier
not
than
insurrection.
Frankie. You have to admit the Beatles were wittier than Frankie Valli. No, weren't they more compelling as
I don't know, I never hung out
personalities?
with Frankie Valli.
Couldn't sing as high, that's
Well,
for sure.
Frankie
press
Valli didn't write his own
conferences.
songs.
We got to go, guys. That's true. That's true.
You're right, Bob Gaudio.
Ken, let's get this all back together again when we're 64, shall we? Not too long for you, maybe a long time for you.
Thanks.
Jackie English and Catherine Burrell, thanks for being on the right-hand side of the table. Larry LeBlanc, Greg Diamond, Jerry Levitan on the other side of the table. Appreciate your insights into this big day for the Beatles and their fans. Now, for more information about tonight's guests and a sneak peek of the new Beatles video game, Beatles Rock Band, please visit us online at tvo.org/the agenda. Tonight's program is produced by Alan Eckenberg, and you can read Alan's thoughts on the enduring legacy of the Beatles. That's on our Inside Agenda Producers blog. And a reminder that tomorrow night is this season's first Your Agenda program. So please join us as we look at political accountability Ontario style, from e-health to OLG, to MPAC, an alphabet soup of spending irregularities has Ontarians up in arms. You can email us your questions at theagenda@tvo.org or via Twitter at twitter.com/theagenda. And during the broadcast, you can join us for an online chat with producer Mike Miner. That's at the Inside Agenda Producers blog. All of that available at tvo.org/theagenda.